how to write the introduction. The lecture outline, it will be for this particular lecture, function of the introduction, length, the parts, and some examples of the introduction. So what is the function of the introduction? Is motivate the reader um, in hopes that they will read the entire paper through the discussion. So it has to be an interesting introduction. And it's the inverted pyramid opposite to the discussion, in which we start with our main finding and then the most important finding, like we were saying earlier today, and then we discuss it in the context of other findings. Here, like Gregorio was saying, we introduce the topic, we go wide and introduce the problem, general problem, and then we focus in one aspect of that general problem. We don't have to review all the literature on that. And then we start narrowing down to articles on that topic, void questions, and our approach, as we will see in detail. So in the introduction, the function is to explain why you did this study. Why is it important to do? What is the void? What is the need that compels us to do this study? How does it compare to what is currently accepted? And it is important to do literature search at the end of your writing your article to just make sure that you have all the what is currently published on this aspect of your research. Um, the editors are going to do their own research, their own bibliography, and they're going to find, they know if you haven't included what is the latest in the publishing world. How are you going to do the study? So once you present what you did and the need, then you're going to explain how you're going to approach it and a short summary of what you found, your main point. So nowadays, since what you found is going to be in the title as well, is not to be hidden, many people already say their main result here, which will be the the main point, the most important that we put in that square in the tree of arguments. Other people prefer to leave the main result or the main finding to the end, to results and discussion. But with the short time we have to read all the literature, it's recommended that you tell them what you found and make it exciting for the reader to keep reading your paper. And that's why we write the introduction after the discussion, because now we know what are the aspects that we want to discuss based on our main finding. And then we can have an introduction that we had written or that we did for our master's or our largest study we're doing. We're going to taper that introduction to only to focus in the area that we are studying. So I'm sorry. So different types. Um, are you testing a hypothesis? Do people who have hepatitis B virus have a higher incidence of hepatitis C as well, B and C, compared with people who never who had not have an HIV infection? No, hepatitis B infection. So people that have had hepatitis B, are they more likely to have hepatitis C than those that have never had hepatitis B? So it's a hypothesis that you're going to prove because you have evidence that suggests this, and you're going to present that in your introduction. Are you improving a method? We just talked about methods in the previous conference, and Luisa and Gregorio gave us examples on how it is important to publish methodology that you found that is very helpful, that can be used in many other areas. Um, so if it's faster, cheaper, better, more sensitive, more practical, then you do a methodology. And Luisa was saying that a person found an important new way of scanning in the brain, if I remember correctly. I'm sorry, Lisa. And then he published a methodology because it could be used for many other diseases. Or you are performing a descriptive study, which is the majority. You are characterizing the distribution of dengue infection in a geographic region. You are characterizing the the response to autism. You're characterizing the abortion rates and complications in a clinic, etc. So keep it brief. Again, see your target journal for average length of the introduction and try to limit the introduction to 3 to 5 paragraphs. So people were asking in the previous talk on discussion how long it should be. It is kind of like it could be longer than the introduction. It usually is, and it should be, because in the introduction you're not discussing the points. You're just showing um, the what's known, what is known in the particular field, and how what are the voids and what you're going to answer those voids. 5 paragraphs. I know it's hard. We have very long introductions that are not necessary. Um, the journal will tell you also what kind of introduction they accept. But the more pointed and the more direct, the better, because we don't want to lose our reader in a very long, complicated introduction that doesn't focus on the topic that we are studying. So here, let's dissect the introduction and the parts of it from the general to the specific, like we said. So this is the known, widely known. This is general sentences with references always. We cannot say it is well known that um, Zika virus causes brain damage in children. No, you have to have a reference, or that we have a new epidemic of coronavirus, implying that, with great mortality. We have to have data, and we cannot use data just just by a publication in a, like we discussed yesterday, in a newspaper or in a blog. We have to have, even for COVID-19, we have to have references that we're going to study one aspect of it. We have to have what is being published, not what is being said in the news. Um, so we're going to compare to other studies, and then these other studies are going to make evidence of what is the need for you to do your research. So, well, these other studies show all this very well, but they don't show this kind of approach we're going to do to answer the question. So the question is the most important part. Um, what is your question? What is it that you want to find that is needed, that is not known, that is going to be new, that is going to show shed light to a problem that you want to solve? And here's the approach. We're going to answer this question by doing this kind of a study with this kind of population, very general, or this kind of methodology. And many times you said what you found. Like I said, many people prefer not to. Um, so this is going to be the structure of the discussion. The first paragraph, very broad, general, orients the reader of the importance of the topic. So, for example, describe the importance of the topic. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the causative organism of tuberculosis. You put it and produces 8 million new cases of TB annually. So that's very general, but it has to have that 8 million, it has to have a reference. You cannot just get it out there because you hear all the time. And here you're introducing the abbreviation. So for the first time, you mentioned Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the cause of tuberculosis, and you're going to refer to tuberculosis as TB. And then it always first describe it at length and then use the abbreviation from then on. Another example, since 2015, the Brazilian population has been living with the social repercussions of Zika virus, and then you introduce the abbreviation. Epidemic, which have raised a debate about diagnosis difficulties, access to care for children, and congenital Zika syndrome. Reference. where you got this data in 2015. Since 2015 in Brazil, there's had to be publications on that aspect that is now well known in the world. Or another example, dengue fever is more severe form of dengue hemorrhagic or shock syndrome are considered among the most important widespread re-emerging infections in the developing countries. Reference. Okay, so you can start like this. Um, and you're going to start already orienting the reader, like, for example, congenital syndrome is probably what you're going to study in your article. You're introducing it already. Um, So you summarize the previous knowledge, as we said in the second part. You summarize, is the word here. We can cite several references that show the same, but we do not talk about each one. So it has been shown, or previous studies have shown that tuberculosis resistant to antibiotics is a big problem, and we can put few references that address this point, but we don't discuss each because then we're just making a one point simple. And then you're preparing the scene for your work. So here you're talking about microbial resistance of tuberculosis, and here you're going to reveal that it's not known how much resistance is in Brazil or in these particular hospitals. You raise a question how important this is to know. Um, and then you are preparing the scene for your work. This should be the longest part of the introduction, the previous knowledge and how you're going to make your approach. So you don't waste a lot of time introducing the topic. You introduce the topic in one paragraph, and then you start already bringing to what it is that the focus you're going to do out of this big field. You're going to study this topic and then summarize the knowledge briefly, and then you explain what you're going to do, what are the gaps, what is the need, what is the question you're going to answer in this article, or you did already answer. So again, cite the studies only. Make sure you have done your literature review. Do not summarize the entire field. However, do reference the studies that help you come up with your question. So it has to be kind of backup that you see this need because it's not being done somewhere else. So you state your question. What specific hypothesis are you testing? What exact process are you describing? Or what methodology are you trying to improve or present a new methodology? And then you state it here. And then you're almost coming to the end where you actually ask the specific question. Um, you explain how you're going to do this, how you're going to make the approach, what specific how you're going to do this study. Briefly say in one or two sentences at the end how you're going to approach this, what is the methodology that you use, and sometimes the results. So, example, in this study, we characterize again Mycobacterium tuberculosis genotypes in the using DNA sequencing. So we characterize samples using this technique. You don't have to explain what the technique is for DNA sequencing. But you mentioned already how you're going to make the approach. So it's going to be a genetic approach. We assess the prevalence of obesity in adolescents living in South Africa using clinical evaluations and questionnaires given up to 450 high school students. So this is a very nice last sentence. We have everything. We assess prevalence, obesity in which ages, which area, using what methodology, clinical evaluation and questionnaires, and how many students we plan to study, or we did study. Sorry, we're not writing a proposal, we're writing sorry, I get confused. So when you have an hypothesis paper, you present what's known. So here, the pyramid again, what it is, the unknown. This is hepatitis C virus is very important. This particular in Egypt. It's a big epidemic. Hepatitis C virus is not well characterized for people co-infected with HIV. Therefore, in this current study, we have characterized hepatitis C virus infections in 200 patients with HIV. Approach to do this, we have measured antibody and T cell responses to hepatitis C virus antigens by ELISA and ELISA spot. So, as you see, you can this is an example of a hypothesis model. Sorry, I need some tea. Okay, I think I've recovered. So the most important paragraph uh, of the introduction. Um, Many readers will only read this paragraph of the introduction. Include your main findings. So the last paragraph is the most important. Sorry, it's I cannot see the title. But, um, many people, as we said it before, are going to read the first paragraph and the last paragraph in the introduction. The last paragraph includes the most exciting part, what you did, how you did it, and possibly your main finding. The text in this paragraph is similar to the text in the abstract and in the beginning of the discussion. So as we said, the main finding is expressed in several places. At the end of the introduction, at the beginning of the discussion, and you can repeat all this in the abstract. That's going to be the important, powerful positions of to tell people what is that you did and what approach you do use and what you obtain. So a good introduction should go from general to specific, summarize the relevant publications on the field, and keep it short for the reader. Keep it short for the reader. Very good. Most important is to motivate the reader to continue reading the entire paper. So as I like that analogy that Gregorio said, you're telling a story. You are telling a story, a colleague or a person from another field, or even your family. Um, there's this general problem in the world, and it's not, there is a great need. Oh, there is a real, sorry, there's a general public in the world, a general problem. And these people have done this and that and the other, but nobody has done this other, which I want to do. Therefore, our approach will be this, and this is how we did it. So tell a story, 5 paragraphs is possible. It could be a bit longer. There is not really a limit, but check the journals and for your own sake, keep it short and keep it pointed. So this is examples of introductions I want you to have. We're not gonna read it, all of it, but it's of course a Zika case in Brazil, diagnostic difficulties, consider a benign disease with no major consequences except these other things, which is first suspected of Zika report. So this is a problem, a syndrome that exists. There's a benign disease of it, and then we suspected of the cases in Brazilian state Rio Grande do Norte, and then there was an outbreak, and then we go and bring, there's a nice story, see? And then we bring the reader, I'm engaged myself already, I want to read it. And then the demand came, and then you are seeking families for specialized care and rehabilitation of children. So this is a very nice short introduction that explains what's the problem and what how you became aware of it, and how you're what is your main rehabilitation for children. This is another example of another introduction that I want to leave you with. This is in the talk, specifically talking about microcephaly, and then you make a story from general to specific. Need to identify, receive, monitor, and offer comprehensive treatment to children born during the Zika epidemic. This article aims to analyze access to specialized services necessary for integrating care of children with Zika in the state of Rio Grande do Norte. Bahia, and region of Brazil, is the most affected of the epidemic. So that's specifically what you want to address. So I leave you with those examples, and we'll take questions. Before going to the title, we have a little title presentation, or I can move on. What do you think, Luisa?
Yeah, so we have a few minutes before our schedule to the demonstration of titles. So I think we could go for a few questions now.
On the introduction, okay.
Yeah, there are some questions here about the introduction as well. Let me just find them. Well, I'm gonna go for some more general ones, and if the attendees have questions about the introduction, please put them in the Q&A. So Gilda is asking, is there a minimum number of references to be cited in an article?
Number of reference, my number that comes to mind is 30. There's not a specific limit set in stone. Not a lot, but not very too few either. So it depends on your field. I don't know what Robert, Stephen, or Gregorio experience has been. Sorry, Stephen. Good morning.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there is no minimum, and that it, as Maria Elena is saying, it simply needs to be guided by both the size or scope of your article and your study, and also by what's known in the field. I would say two things is, well, in some ways, maybe what's more important than the minimum is to not have too many. So in fact, in our breakout yesterday, we were talking with somebody who has over 50 references, and it's been suggested that that's going to be too many. And I've had that problem too. So if you have a big study and are doing a lot of work, you can end up with 50 to 100 references, and journals typically do not want more than 50 for a major article. And if what you're doing, you then submit as a short communication, sort of an extended letter, you might only have 10, and that's fine. It's simply sort of the minimum necessary to address the points Maria Elena that said, that you're referencing the sources for what is known in the field, and for establishing the motivation for your work, and basis for comparison with other studies.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. It's a question from Rosaline and Eshetu. They're asking pretty much the same thing, which is, are we presenting our findings in the introduction?
Yes or no? I would want to hear the opinion of Gregorio and Stephen. In the introduction at the end, it is recommended now that you present your main finding only, not all your findings. At the end, you said, this is the approach we did, this is the study we did, and this is what we found. Just simple a sentence, because the reader will go to the end of the introduction to know what you did and how you did it. And it helps to have it there, but I don't know what is the fashion in the Berkeley lab. Many authors don't want to do it.
Gregorio, what do you think?
I think my suggestion is whenever you want to select a journal type, try to go and see what usually people do in that journal type, because some you see they don't review much of their data on the last paragraph of the introduction, while other people do. I think it's a good idea when you have your introduction come from very general and you can pinpoint the problem, the research problem, and then you finish your paragraph just to say, this is the problem we tackled, and that's what we have found here. And just a very general summary. You don't review everything, because anyways, you're going to have your conclusion section to really pinpoint what is actual summary of your results and your discussion. But I feel it's nice to have an introduction in which you come from very broad and you answer, you pinpoint your problem, and then you answer you show that you have answered the question, the problem, you have at least addressed the problem, your research problem.
Actually, I think you're making a really good point, which is that, it's important at the end of the manuscript writing process to go and look at articles in the journals you're hoping to submit to. And then you're right, I always use that as a guide for refining my manuscript before submission. So yeah, and I agree. There's a manuscript that I'm currently involved in preparing for publication, and it involves development of a new diagnostic method for acute bacterial infections. And so we have done what Maria Elena suggested, and we have sort of a broad statement of what's known and where the gap or the problem is. And then at the very end, we essentially have one sentence that says, so given this context, we used a meta-analysis of 300 different data sets to develop a concise diagnostic tool for acute bacterial infection, period. But we didn't go, so we stated what we did, but in a very concise way. So we didn't get into any details about the performance of it or any methodology beyond sort of the general concept. So that was the extent to which we reported our findings in the introduction.
Yeah, in general, I think the main rule is, we already said, you have to go to the journal you want to publish and look at what is more common. And the reason for that is also because the editor is a very busy person and you have to go through a lot of papers. So you have to make their life easier in a way that he expects to see something, he wants to see that. He's not going to reject your paper if you don't have it, but if you have it, it's going to be easier for him or her to read it. And then he will be less annoyed if there are no the main features that he would expect to see in your paper, including results or not at the end of introduction section. It shows that you did your research and then you know what's usually required by them.
Thank you. I think this also answers the questions of Shinonielum and Sahiti about, so they were asking where you should put your main point, or how you should end your introduction, with the result or with the objective. And I think this is answered now by, you should go and check the journal where you are planning to submit and see how people usually do that in those specific journals. So there is a question here, which is very interesting, from Sahiti as well. So the question is about, when you're writing your introduction, the first paragraph will probably be similar to other introduction paragraphs in other papers in the field, because you're doing the broad scope. So his question is, and that's the same for some parts of the discussion. So I guess his question is, can we cite the introduction of other articles? How can we do that, as they're going to be very similar?
You cannot cite introduction from other articles. You cannot cite your own introductions in the past. You have to start from zero and make your new introduction. It could be similar to others because it's the same field. do not cite or repeat or copy and paste what Gregory was saying of self-plagiarism. You have to develop the introduction again with different words, even if it's the same topic. Similar, of course, very similar, but please rewrite it.
Yeah, for me, often I feel as though the first sentence of the introduction is the most difficult one.
Yeah.
And it requires some creativity and thinking about, even if you've done similar work in the past, you know, what's a slightly new angle on, or new development in what you're doing now. And just to be clear, you can cite your own past work and other people's work, but as Maria Elena and Gregorio are saying, you can't simply copy and paste text from anybody else's work or your own.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot of work of creativity and changing things that sometimes is really hard to be changed. In my field, we always write that there are 4 types of dengue 1 to 4 that cause dengue fever or severe hemorrhagic fever. So like this is a sentence, if you go in the dengue papers, almost every single paper has a very similar sentence. And it's really hard to try to change that and put that into a different context. So sometimes the idea and even the wording is kind of repeated, but sometimes it must be there, but you have to try to make it different somehow. So it's a very creative work. It's really hard. I write and rewrite my first sentence like a zillion of times until I'm like more or less happy about it.
Thank you. While we're talking about citation, there is a question from Avinav asking, should we cite the original article, or is it okay to cite a finding which we read in another article which cited the original article? So I think you got the question.
Yeah, there is a common problem. We cite the article in where the other article was cited, and then the other article was cited. That's not allowed for many reasons. One, for the reviewer and the reader, they go to that reference and where the other method was cited, and then have to go back to the other reference. So it's best, and it should be the original reference that mention this what the other paper is mentioning. Do not refer a reference for the other reference. Go to the source. Go to the main publication, please.
I think this also goes to answer the question about how to choose a reference for the methodology. So the question is, when a method was performed and explained in several papers, which paper I should choose to cite? Should it be the oldest one?
So actually, I think maybe we can each answer, or Gregorio and I can, but what I do is I go back in sort of in time to the last article, which has a description of the method that would allow somebody to repeat it, right? Because that's sort of the gold standard for science, is that somebody else should be able to repeat. I mean, given the same resources, they should be able to repeat your study. So I just often, for instance, if there's a laboratory, since I'm a laboratory scientist, that develops a technique, they might refer to their previous paper. So let's say they have 2 papers. In the second one, they refer to the first. I might have gotten the idea from the second paper, but if I look in the second paper and there's not a full description, then I go back to the first one.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should try to cite the original as much as possible. Sometimes also the original is modified by other people, and you have to make clear which protocol you're using, the modified one or the original one. And if, despite the fact that you try to cite as close of the original as possible, but also even if you're citing another method's paper, it's also good to write a brief description, so you don't have, we the readers don't have to go through the whole history of citations to try to identify the answer you want for our method.
Thank you. again, a question related, which comes from Wanji. The question is, how old is too old when it comes to citing a paper?
There is no such thing.
It is not too old. The original discovery is always the original discovery. The original description of the technique, like Southern Blot, it's still the same, even though it's 30 years old. Especially methodology, like Gregorio was saying and Stephen, but or even in knowledge that a field is not very well reviewed. But if you cite an author that used the original technique but is made substantial modifications to that technique, and you're going to use those modifications, then you can cite that more recent author. So you put the two references. You put, we're going to do the experiment as described by Castro et al. Of the original method in your references. So that's what I would do in that case.
Thank you. Question from Christopher. For our articles that have to be paid for and only the abstract is available, can we cite the results from only the abstract? From reading only the abstract, I guess, the question.
Usually you want to have access to the paper to be able to criticize and understand if you agree with the findings. So it's really important that you have access to the data to be able to have your own analysis of it. Only through the abstract you would not be able to see it, ideally.
Yeah, in the old ways, when we used to actually write letters by hand and mail, you will request the author to send you a copy of your paper privately by mail. And maybe you can try this by email, which is easier. If the journal is charging you a lot and you only want that particular article, you can write to the author and say, could you be so kind of providing me with a copy of your publications, which I've been charged, and they might be grateful enough to send it.
Yeah, I mean, I do that. I request articles by email, and I also send copies of my articles when people write directly to me. And I agree with Gregorio. And it also addresses the earlier comment. It's important to have looked at the primary research results for something you were citing, because you are now responsible for transmitting that in those conclusions on to the scientific community. And so it's important that you have confidence in their findings. And also, frankly, it avoids perpetuating incorrect or erroneous results, which is a problem. If people simply cite references that other people have cited and there are incorrect results in there, then it becomes sort of dogma that is propagated through the community.
That can create a problem of wrong citation. You are citing a wrong work or idea. You're not citing properly because you don't understand the work you are citing. But I just want to mention something else that was really important when you talked about the access to the abstract. You only have access to the abstract, but not to the whole paper. That already tells one really important thing on the side note is the abstract is the most important part of your paper, basically, because it's going to be the most read part, is what really going to attract people to it. So you have to put extra care and make a very entertaining abstract so people really want to download your paper and read it and cite it, right?
Very good. We're going to talk about the abstract tomorrow, so keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have some more questions about references. One is, if there is a limit, it's from Bayou. So if there is a limit of the number of references you can put in your article, but I do have to cite all of those, how do I prioritize and choose which ones I am going to I'm going to use.
The person must have all the references that he thinks are needed. Is that the question?
Yeah, but if that number is
Yes.
bigger than the limits of the journal.
So it's a very difficult question sometimes. I find myself staring at a list of references and I can't decide how to trim it down. So I usually, in that situation where I have multiple references for one aspect of my study, I try to choose the earliest ones that I believe are comprehensive or that in the field are regarded as sort of seminal findings, very important findings. So, for instance, I wrote a paper on, I don't know, dengue vaccines a while ago. And so, maybe I had a list of 10 references from, let's just say, early phase trials of dengue vaccines. And so I chose maybe the 5 that I felt were most important to the developments in the field.
Thank you. And that relate to your particular approach and your particular, which are make it more important. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. There is an interesting one here from Eshetu saying that some scholars are recommending to avoid multiple citations in a single statement. Do you have any comments about that?
You're mute.
I've seen this, it's a statement. It usually has to do with the epidemiology of a disease that is being found in many, many places. And you see up to 4, 5, 6 references to the same sentence. So there's no need to put them all. Just select those that are more relevant to your area. What does Gregorio have to say?
I think that happens sometimes. Again, always you have to prioritize the most important one, the most seminal ones that will be better accepted. But sometimes there's a reason why you want to do that. If you have the space, sometimes I have used that because I want to stress a point that I'm writing a sentence and that's not very widely accepted or something that's very new. And you want to emphasize they are like strong papers that are really giving support to my argument or to my idea. And then I put at least 1 or 2 or 3 references to give like support to the idea that I want to make. Or like Mariela mentioned, when you have epidemiological studies and it happen in different sites, one in Nicaragua, one in Vietnam, and one in Brazil, and then you want to show there are different studies on that particular topic. So sometimes you have reasons to do it. I don't think that's a big issue, actually. It really depends on your limit of references and why you want to cite several papers for that sentence. Sometimes you want to just strengthen the idea. You want to convince other people that's not just in your mind. A lot of other people think likewise, or you have different types of data out there already that supports you somehow.
Thank you. Question from Ajahi. So is it mandatory to identify gaps in an article you are citing in your paper?
It's not mandatory to identify a gap, but you have to identify a need. You have to present a justification. This could be not a gap, but something new you want to do. Why is this important to know? Show me why it's that I'm using this approach, a new approach. Even though there is not a gap, you have to have a justification to explain why you think this is important.
I think also the point here was about identifying like weaknesses in the article you're citing. So I'm citing an article, but I recognize there is a weakness in that. Do I have to say that I'm citing this, but I recognize that this and this is weak?
You don't have to write that. Every time you read a paper, you have to be critical about the papers you're reading and understand that your paper and other people's papers have strengths and limitations. So whenever you're making a point, you are gonna cite certain paper, you're citing for their strength, for whatever they are providing. And whenever you are writing a research project, you are going to check the limitations of those papers so you know what is actually missing in the field. So you can make a case for your study. I need to do this study because there are several studies on this particular field, but they are not addressing this issue. Then you have a good reason. But whenever you writing your discussion, something like that, then you want to see the strengths. If you want to cite that particular papers because there's a strength there that is supporting your finding or not. So you go for the strength.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add a broader point, which is, I always try to keep in mind that well done research requires hard work. So even when I'm pointing out gaps in the work others have done, I try to be respectful. And, I only, as Gregorio and Maria Elena are saying, I point it out if it's relevant to the work that I am presenting. But I don't discuss weaknesses in other articles if they're not relevant to the work, my own work that I'm presenting.
Yeah, very important point from Stephen. Be polite always. Don't create fights with other people. You have to be extremely polite in the way you're going to phrase even other people's limitations, like to the extreme. You don't want people to be upset with you on the way you're writing about their research.
Thank you. Lessons for life. So here comes a question from Hisham, which is it mandatory to comment on conflict of interest if it's present or absent? And if it's present, is it a weakness or a strength of the study?
Actually, it's a strength. You have to write your conflict of interest. It's better to divulge it yourself than having the editor or some reader find it. And it's more honest and more direct, saying this presents a conflict of interest with this company, with this discovery, with this lab, which has not altered the way we interpret our results. You hear it many times when an article is criticizing something, and it said, even though there are sponsors, we are presenting this diverse point of view. So yes, divulge it, it gives it strength.
Thank you.
Many, if not most, journals now require at submission, they usually have a form and you have to declare any potential conflicts of interest. And, as long as you disclose it, it's not a reason for them to reject your manuscript. So it's much better to declare it up front than hide it.